Yeah, dear colleagues, I'm really happy and honored and thankful to the organizers for the opportunity to present some of the almost final results of my 2-year project, which deals exactly with the use of mobile phones in war. And so why and what is it all about? We live in extremely dense communication and electronic environments. You can see that from this picture, a screenshot of available Wi-Fi networks I took at a random urban space in Philadelphia a couple of days ago, right? So this leads many scholars to speak about mediatization as a deep integration of media and communication with all spheres of life. And all spheres of life include also the military and war in this respect. And the mediatization of war has been studied somewhat, primarily in the US and Israeli context. But not in combat, mostly about communicating from the bases. The key takeaway of this previous research is that mobile use at the base reflects the civilian practices. We have noted a widespread use in Syria of mobile phones in Syria, Yemen, but they are very different from Russo-Ukrainian war because of the lack of infrastructure on the same scale. And in the Russo-Ukrainian war since 2014, we have seen some research on information warfare, most definitely, on the use of social media by both civilians and the soldiers, but as a focus on infrastructures and the materiality and the role of devices as encapsulated by this picture of a makeshift charging point at the front line has been missing. So I decided to do just that, and I did, and I'm still doing, in a way, this qualitative interview study with 25 in-depth interviews, primarily with the members of the military and veterans, but also some spouses and displaced civilians, both men and women, so it's quite well balanced in terms of the types of the military units and the geographical and social origins of my respondents. And the results indicate that the communication infrastructures are extremely important. You can see that even from how Russia invested a huge effort in deconnecting the so-called DPR and LPR from the Ukrainian communication grid by laying optic internet cables and erecting mobile towers, creating their own GSM mobile phone operators. And the frontline media ecology is defined by several types of communication media. First of all, the field phone, which uses wires and is safe, but is not really flexible. The walkie-talkies, radios that are very available, but very insecure and prone to hacking. And then tablets and mobile phones, including also the button phones, which are the Kalashnikovs of information war at the front line. Now, these mobile phones bring, what they do, first of all, they bring home to the front line, and they blur the line between family and front, which leads to developing informal but strict rules about communicating with the soldier for the family, such as, it's only about voice communication, it's only about calling, avoidance of messengers that are easier to hack, and the minimalist skeletal communication. Then, apart from these civilian functions, mobiles fulfill a number of combat functions, such as communication during combat, where they fill in the deficiency in military communication devices. Then mapping, for example, all sorts of mapping on the battlefield, and even fire control systems that are run on tablets, though, rather than smartphones, for example. And another huge area here is also wiretapping, and it is very easy to do because most of the equipment, such as those radios and walkie-talkies, are very cheap and very often Chinese-made. They're very insecure, and they're used by both sides in the conflict, so they can, in principle, listen to each other. Then my interviewees perceive the wiretapping by own security forces as omnipresent, and therefore both factors lead to the reliance on code words, metaphoric and digit codes. Then another aspect, another liability that a mobile brings to the front line is the ease of targeting and of military fire by mobile phone signal. And also earlier, especially earlier in the war, the use of human spotters plus mobiles, especially by the Russians, whereas the Ukrainians know that they prefer to rely on drones instead of civilians to do that. And one of the quotes just describes the experience of a soldier being targeted by just this artillery fire, targeted by a phone call, essentially, from one of the soldiers to his mother that led to the destruction of an entire military unit. Apart from that, mobiles fulfill an important function at the front line that is universally described by my respondents as boring until 2022, of course. First of all, keeping informed through social media, word of mouth, which leads to the risk of poor fact-checking. They watched films, and one of my respondents watched all seasons of Game of Thrones on the front line, for example. They play games, listen to the radio, read books, and do all sorts of things, and especially the cameras. The presence of the cameras in smartphones makes it easy to do a lot of video pranks, such as this a book they found in an abandoned Russian trench, which is titled 100 Positions for Delicious Sex. And they also film combat for entertainment, but they also film to document interrogations, attack consequences, and there is a lot of evidence about Russians filming torture and prisoner abuse. Now, in this invasion, we can see that Russians learned just how much Ukrainians rely on mobile phones. So they developed this mobile blackout doctrine, as I call it, right? They use sophisticated radio electronic warfare devices to impose this radio silence. They destroy mobile towers physically to basically impose a radio silence on both soldiers and civilians, which allows actually acts of genocide such as Bucha and Mariupol to go in the quiet. The Ukrainian response to this is more reliance on satellite communications such as Starlink, for example, and it is actually Russians that now suffer from the deficiency in secure military communication. So they have to use mobiles, they loot from civilians, and this leads to actually targeting them both with wiretapping and then targeting top brass with strikes. So some of the conclusions from the invasion, some of the lessons include that there are robust communication networks on both sides in this war. And a modern battle can be described as a battle of communication networks, and whichever is stronger wins. Mobiles thus became indispensable and actors in this war, and they also became a sort of a human right for civilians. In conclusion, I can say that we could call the Russo-Ukrainian war full-fledged digital or even post-digital war that has already integrated the digital in it. Mobile phones do a lot of job, but they also bring risks and liabilities. They hybridize the boundaries and become a mediated extension of a battlefield, which may well force us to review the very definition of what constitutes weapon as a tool of combat. Thank you so very much, and you can look up more of my work on my academia.edu page, on Twitter, or even on Facebook. Thank you.